Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Barkoff. I am the Sober Cold Bear, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sober Cold Bear podcast. I am remote today, so I'm not used to being in my. I'm used to obviously being in my studio, but obviously I'm not. Joining me today is my good buddy, John Girard. We've known each other for 20 years, if you can believe it. John, thank you for being here.
Matt, it's great to be here. And yeah, I wish you hadn't said that about 20 years. That makes me feel even older than I am.
Well, like I said, you got the Mr. Clean look going on, and you
I
look
know,
great.
I know. I was losing the battle and I just, decided to, as we say, like surrender to win, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, just for everybody, the Sober Cold Bear podcast is a resource. It's here for you. It's not a place to come if you want to get sober. Great place to get sober is go to AA, go to rehab. I always kind of kid, and I should probably gone to rehab, but I never did. This is a resource to you. And I think the thing that I always kind of talk about most importantly is, if you need help, ask for help. Reach out to your friend, your loved one. Reach out to me, reach out to John. We're on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Ask a loved one, your husband, your wife, your brother. But the first kind of three words, three things that you need to say is, I need help. And then from there, you can kind of start your journey. I work an active program. John will tell his story very, very soon. But again, this is really kind of a place to get different folks' stories and to kind of learn and see how we're dealing with life on life's terms in a recovery program. So
hmm
without further ado, John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your story, talk a little bit about, whatever it is and we'll kind of dive into it around kind of subjects that between business and recovery and addiction and all the others. So
Awesome.
go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I think the easiest place for me to start, as some of you might know, a common way to share one story in recovery is what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. So, what was it like deep in the addiction? Matt and I knew each other when I was pretty deep in my addiction, and my drug of choice was alcohol. It's only by sort of sheer luck that I didn't pile a whole bunch of other stuff on top of that. Yeah, alcohol was my drug of choice, and at the time we knew each other, I was running a company that was venture backed. I was the CEO there. I'd started it with a couple of college friends. Had some ups and downs as you do in startup land. We had done the investor route, venture backed company, and it was a very intense experience. And I think, if I roll the tape back um, to closer to the beginning of my drinking, my addiction, what I see there is a pattern that then, continued throughout my life into that startup and right up to the end of my drinking, which is, I run a little bit anxious. Right. So I have a little bit of a sort of an anxiety in me that's always been there. And the short version of it is that alcohol cured that anxiety, right? Like from the very first sip that I had way back when, I had this sense, this feeling of like, wow, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot less anxious. I can talk to people. I'm not so self-conscious. So that was an insight I didn't really fully grasp or understand until I started my sobriety journey. That was sort of this baseline that was unfolding. What
Now,
that
John,
meant for me, yeah, yeah, yeah,
so I joined the company in I think 2005. The
yeah.
company had previously kind of been launched, I think 3 or 4 years prior, right?
Actually, 99 technically.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
even
pretty
further
far
than that,
back.
it had
Yeah,
gone through a number of different iterations, if I
yeah,
recall,
yeah,
a
yeah,
number
yeah,
of different pivots, technology pivots that, there were a number of different things, and I think I came right when kind of things were starting to really just
yeah,
take off the runway, and it was a really killer run. I mean, we worked together for 5 or 6 years, I
yeah.
think in total. Um, to kind of double click into this, when did you? Because I mean, I loved working with you,
Mm,
both on a personal level and a professional level. You're strategic, you're cerebral, you're incredibly, you're a wonderful person, you're a wonderful leader. You know, you're terrific to people. You're
mm.
incredibly transparent. I mean, all the great attributes and qualities of a leader I always appreciated about you. Um, when did you start to realize that things were getting a little bit out of control?
Hmm.
And like, was the drinking kind of like from 99 all the way through, or was it something that kind of, as the pressures continued to kind of go up and up and up, that became kind of your escape?
Yeah. Yeah, really good question. As I think happens for a lot of us, I didn't really realize it was a problem until I really hit the wall, and it was only in retrospect that I could start to understand the what was actually going on, and that, I thought I was kind of losing my mind, like I thought that there was something else wrong with me, and I even remember telling my dad when I eventually did get to rehab, like, hey, I appreciate you doing this for me, but this is a place for people who have a drinking problem, and I don't think I have that. I have something else. Like I'm losing my mind. And he's like, okay, well, let's start by getting rid of the alcohol and see what happens. So I didn't realize it, right? And if I look back, I mean, I can see the progression, and actually, there's a couple of like markers or milestones. Uh, I had a bunch of rules for myself to make sure that I was, not on a slippery slope. I have addiction in my family. One of those rules was I'm never going to drink alone. Broke that rule. One of them was, I would never drive after having had anything to drink. Broke that rule. I had another rule about I'm never going to drink in the morning. Broke that rule, right?
You know what I
So,
call
so
those? I call
what's
those
that?
the rationalizing of things, which is
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to rationalize. So I'm going to
yeah,
make things kind of normalized. Then I'm going to lie
yeah.
and tell myself about it, making sure that it's, acceptable.
That it's acceptable, and that means that I'm okay, that I haven't sort of crossed any important line. And by the way, that first breaking that first rule of drinking alone, that's actually kind of an interesting story, because I was in New York for 9/11, and we actually had a corporate apartment there that was in Tribeca, so it was, I don't know, 20 blocks or so from Ground Zero. I happened to be
I think
leading
I
a
stayed there one
panel.
time.
Yeah, yeah, it was a nice spot, right? It
Wasn't
was
that the
really
one with the
lovely.
bunk beds?
Yeah, there were bunk beds. There were bunk bed in a loft bed, and
Yes, yes,
we
yes.
had we
Totally
had
know.
a rooftop deck. I mean,
That
it was
place was
really
killer,
amazing.
man.
Yeah. But yeah, I broke that rule that on September 12th. So, September 11th, I was actually moderating a panel in where was that? Like it was the Roosevelt Hotel, 44th and Madison or something. And it was funny because when the first plane hit, it was like right before the panel was supposed to start, maybe 10 minutes before. And I was sitting there and there's nobody in the audience, just me and the panelists. I'm like, what is going on here? And then somebody comes in and tells me what's going on. And um, trippy couple of days. We ended up staying Upper East Side that night. But then the guy I was with, who was also with the company, we we actually forged some documents to get south of all the police lines, and get back to the apartment. We actually
It was
volunteered at
close.
Ground
It was
Zero.
close to ground zero.
Yeah, and we went down and volunteered at Ground Zero, which was kind of crazy. And in retrospect, I
I didn't
recognize
know
that
that.
was actually, yeah, it was a traumatic event. It was this kind of ragtag group of uniformed people and civilians that just showed up to say, what can we do? And we had to we organized at a high school real close by, and we actually had to write a name of a loved one and their phone number on our arm in Sharpie, just in case, right? It ended up being, not particularly spectacular what we did, only because there was nothing to do, right? Like it
Hmm.
turned out there was nothing to do, but I recognize that now as traumatic. And that night, I um I ended up back at that apartment, and um, there was a bottle of Absolute vodka in the freezer, and I drank alone for the first time, September 12th, 2001. So, And I don't know that the other line crossings were quite as dramatic, cinematic as that, but they happened. They happened even to the point of driving after drinking with my kids in the car. Right, like that
Hmm.
was where this thing took me. Like the most unthinkable, unforgivable thing that I could imagine, or among them. um, and by the way, I love how you framed this in the beginning. The reason I think it's so important to share even those dark things is I remember when somebody shared some of the things that they had done openly in a meeting in rehab and thinking, oh my God, I'm not alone. Right. So this whole idea of like, man, if you've ever driven, under the influence with your kids in the car, and the shame is so high that you don't know what you can do to soothe yourself, like, hey, me too, and so many other people in recovery. And here we are sitting on the other side, able to talk about it openly, and I'm not proud of it at all, of course. But I do know that it's part of my story, and I've made my peace with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very lonely, lonely thing.
Hmm.
And I think when we're kind of in the, in the bottoms of our addiction, and we're drinking and using, and our character defects are coming out in the worst way, we're not working the steps, we're not identifying when challenges occur and how to actually handle those in healthy ways. We don't realize it. And then kind of
Yeah,
on the other side of it, when you're actually going through it and you're kind of looking back on all the times that you did those things, it's like, man, what was I thinking?
yeah,
What was going on? And it's like a lot of times you can't really go through it. That's kind of what happens. And that's the beauty of talking about it. That's the beauty
yep,
of being in meetings and actually telling your story. That's the beauty of doing like a podcast and actually saying, I drank alone for the first time on September 12th. And maybe you hadn't thought about that for a while.
yep.
But again, like, I think, hopefully one person sees this and they're like, wow, I've been driving way too much with my kids.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I
yep.
probably should maybe, rethink that.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And for me, it was a combination of somebody else saying, hey, me too, like I did this. And especially for people who are 6 months, a year, like not like 20 years sober, because that was really hard to relate to when I was, first in recovery. It's like, I can't fathom that. That doesn't make any sense to me. But those people that were like 6 months, 1 year sober who were saying, yeah, me too. And the light was on in their eyes, right? They weren't cowering. They weren't sort of sitting in the corner. Like, it wasn't the typical, Hollywood presentation of an AA meeting where it's this cold, depressing room with everybody smoking and like a bunch of people crying. Like that, it wasn't that. Like, in fact, it wasn't that so much that it was jarring. Like at the first outside meeting that we went to, when I was in rehab, it was in the community, and we get into this room and there's balloons and there's a cake because somebody's celebrating their 1 year sobriety. And everything is so bright and everybody's smiling and laughing and the
Mhm.
lights are on in their eyes. I honestly, we got in there and I was like, I think we might be in the wrong room. Like, I don't think this is right. Like, that's the
Yeah,
way
that's
my head was at that point. And then this woman who's bright eyed and exuberant and joyful, sits up there, because my second thought was, well, okay, if they're this happy, there's no way that they could have ever felt the way that I feel right now. There's just no way. Like these people must have, had a little too much wine at a party and decided to, whatever. And this woman then, bright-eyed and joyful, sits there and tells her story, and it was way worse than mine. And that's when I leaned in and said, oh my God, like you a year ago, that was you, and this is you now. And I just couldn't put it together. I couldn't understand how that was possible. And I wanted to understand how that was possible. And that's what kind of got me to step in all the way, as they say, come all the way in, sit all the way down, and start paying attention.
yeah. I mean, this is a humble thing, and you're basically describing kind of that that moment that you're like, holy shit, like, I can do this, and I can't do it by myself, but I need the support of these folks. So I want to double click into kind of what led into rehab. So you were
Hmm.
running this company, right? And I want to,
Yeah.
so we spent some time together. We had a wonderful, couple of years, and
Hmm.
you know, the company did great. We all financially benefited from it. We had some really great customers. We
Hmm.
celebrated some really, really, great wins. But at what point was the pressure getting to you, or reaching you in a way that you were just like, okay, I'm gonna, because the usage obviously continued and
Yeah.
increased, and
Yep.
it impacted everything, right? So
Absolutely.
kind of walk me through the timeline of from the usage all the way into rehab. Maybe we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
spend
Yeah.
diving into
That's
that.
that's yeah, that's great. So it's funny, as I look back on it, it's very clear to me that I would have hit the wall anyway. So, progressive disease, right? Like over any considerable period of time, this thing gets worse. And
Hmm.
it says it right there in some of the literature and recovery circles, over any considerable time, this gets worse, never better. And that's just a feature of the disease. And by the way, it is a disease. And I think that's a kind of interesting side discussion too, maybe. But um, so I think that realistically, I would have hit the wall at some point. And in some regards, I look at what was happening at that company at that time, that was, so it was so storm tossed by what was going on in the macroeconomic environment. That was the 2008 kind of crisis. We were
Yep,
in a fundraising cycle right then. And
I remember.
because we were playing the venture back game, in the venture back game, you grow between fundraising cycles, and the reason you fundraise is because you're growing at a loss. That's the way the game is played. Like you overspend on sales, marketing, go to market, client acquisition, to win. So you're always operating at a loss, which in retrospect, well, not in retrospect, I think now at this point in my career, I'm much more biased towards businesses that can be profitable immediately. I just don't like the venture model. Um, and one of the reasons I don't like it is because when the macroeconomic environment changes, and the funding, the people writing checks kind of put their checkbooks away for a while. If you're in a fundraising cycle, there's nothing you can do, right? So in the end, that's what was going on, and that's where we were. We were in a fundraising cycle in 2008, I guess, into nine, and it was gnarly. So at the time when my drinking was starting to escalate, the
Hmm.
pressures mounted even more. I was and had been having, unsurprisingly, trouble in my marriage. Any form of use of alcohol and indeed some other drugs too. It just kind of affects everything. Like my physical well-being was starting to collapse. I wasn't sleeping well. All that stuff piles on, and that's when my use increased. So, among other things, I found that I could really sort of settle my nerves with a drink at lunch. So I would go take lunch alone, and I remember one of those kind of like just hits you and like, oh my God, that was a bit dark. I remember going to, it was one of the Irish bars, pubs around somewhere around where the office was. And I had my little corner at the bar where I was kind of hidden. And I sit down, and without saying anything, the bartender gives me an IPA and a shot of Jameson. Like he knew what was coming. And I didn't even have to tell him it. And that hit me at that moment, like, um, well, this is a little weird, and I don't know that this is good. But it wasn't enough to stop at that point, right?
So the alcohol use like continued, and
Yeah. And then
you
and then there
were
was yeah, there was I'll just give you this bit too. So because I was in such denial about what was actually going on, as you increase your use of alcohol, your body habituates. That's kind of one of the things that happens.
sure.
You develop eventually. So it starts with the psychological dependence, which is like, ooh, this makes me feel less anxious.
Yeah,
It's a self-medication for a lot of people.
sure.
And then it moves to physical dependence, which becomes, your brain in the presence of too much alcohol says, hey, we're not operating a high enough level. Everything's depressed. And the way the brain fixes that is it creates, antidepressant stimulants, cortisol, to counter that, to get it back to homeostasis, right? So
Yep.
so you end up with too much stimulant, too much cortisol, too much of some of the other neurotransmitter, or I guess chemicals that sort of
Well,
ramp you up.
and cortisol is an creates anxiety, but it also allows you to gain weight. It allows you to
All kinds of
like
things.
collect and keep,
Yeah,
water, and all the things that kind of
yeah,
cause you to bloat and things like that.
yeah.
So
And
they're
and and
all
the brain's cortisol response like doesn't adjust as quickly as your alcohol ups and downs. So, at some point, if you are drinking enough and you stop drinking for 10 hours, the depressant goes away and the cortisol is now here. And so the anxiety is intense. That's where people get sweats, even shakes, certainly like palpitations, heartbeat, like the fight or flight has turned on, right? So I
that's
was
why you can die. That's why alcohol is one of
was
the con-
correct.
you can actually die from withdrawal because of what you're describing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I don't know all the mechanics around that, but I do think that it's correct that it's the overstimulation that leads to the seizures that can cause can
Yep.
even cause death.
Yep.
Yeah, and weird. I mean, alcohol is one of the only drugs, if not the only sort of widely used one that you
think
can
it's like
die from
two.
withdrawal.
There's one. I think it's like Xanax but it's
Yeah,
mostly alcohol. Which is
yeah.
ironic because it's the most readily available.
Yeah, and it turns out actually that Xanax, which is in the benzo diazepam or pim category or family, so that's Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, all those. It turns out that that has the same
Hmm.
mechanic, mechanism of action, or whatever they call it, which is why it's used in treating alcohol withdrawal, and why it produces similar effects. So, and that's actually where my story went, right? So I was seeing doctors trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I was, of course, not telling them the truth about my alcohol use. I now understand that all the doctors in the world know that nobody tells the truth about alcohol use when they're
Of
when they're
course.
drinking a lot. So, the rule of thumb I think doctors use is you take the reported number. Realistically, if anybody says that they drink daily, the doctor should and normally does multiply the number of drinks by two or three to get the truth. And that
Yeah.
was probably about the factor that I used. So anyway, I was going to doctors, and one of the things that I was trying to kind of get across to them is like, I'm anxious all the time. This is ridiculous. It's debilitating. And I was actually prescribed Klonopin, which is a
Mm.
benzodiazepam. It's in the Xanax Valium family. And I did not know that that was basically alcohol in solid form. But using it absolutely made me feel better. It really took the edge off for reasons that are now completely clear. It was just alcohol in a pill. And there are strong admonitions in the prescription there about using alcohol, drinking while you're using this drug,
Yeah. It's a
which I
double. Yeah.
ignored completely.
Yep.
And in fact, what I noticed was I felt really good when I combined them, right?
Until
And
until they
so
weren't until they weren't combined.
until they weren't combined. Yeah, that's exactly right. So in retrospect, so look, the company's going through this fundraising cycle. My usage is increasing. I get prescribed this benzo that helps me, but of course doesn't help me. At this point, I am not infrequently stopping at Whole Foods in the beginning of the day and buying a couple of screw top bottles of wine,
Hmm.
and crackers and cheese, because I want to tell the checkout person that I'm going to a wine tasting later,
Oh yeah, of
and that's
course.
that's why I'm doing this. Like, it's really important that they don't think I have a problem, right? And by the way, anybody who is on the alcoholism spectrum, knows why it's screw top, right? Um, it's funny. I talked to my sister. I told her this, and she's a normal drinker, and she's
Yeah,
like, why screw top? Why is that an important facet of the story?" And
it should be
not
involved.
recognizing, yeah, you got to get at it, right? I want to start when I get back to the car, and I don't want to carry a corkscrew around.
Yeah. So when,
So
so John, so when did it? What was kind of the first time that somebody close to you in the business noticed a unique change?
yeah,
Hey man, like something is off with you. I don't
yeah.
know what it
So
is.
so
Like
yeah, I think I probably got that 6 months or so before the wall I hit the wall. And it was one of my business partners. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure if it's just because I'm sort of steeped in recovery culture now, or if something has changed, more globally. But it felt at the time like there was not much understanding about what this looked like, and how to what to do about it when you see it in somebody else. So
I mean,
again, I don't know if that,
I got news for you, man. It's 2025, and I talk to a
yeah,
lot of leaders,
yeah,
both that are on the podcast and are going to be on the podcast, and I talk to HR leaders and everything else. It's still a problem.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Well,
still a problem. I mean,
yeah.
and
You mean
it's
recognizing it?
not just recognizing it, but actually dealing with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Actually
That I
managing
get.
it,
Yeah,
actually like having the right things to do, what to say, how to handle it. Like a lot of leaders don't. A lot of leaders, kind of become a little bit more regressive rather than like
yeah,
proactive.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's naturally kind of why people don't talk about it
yeah.
in the world of business. It's still kind of like a very shunned type of thing.
Yeah, third rail. I think that's right. And look, that's one of the reasons that I like in the last 10 years, especially. I mean, I've been sober. I just celebrated 16 years
Amazing.
a couple days ago. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you.
What's your
Yeah.
sobriety
August 4th. Yeah.
date?
So
Okay.
um I and especially in the last 10 years, like I've been a lot more vocal because there's nothing, in some ways there's nothing unique about the entrepreneur substance abuse story. Like I thought I thought I was completely unique. Turns out that I look just like, in most respects, the guy who, used drugs in a drug house for 10 years and ended up on the street. Like it's just the details are different, right? But I also know that, like, I didn't know any of that when I was first getting sober, and it really helped me to talk to other people who were more like me, to sort of validate what was going on. And so I've been pretty active and pretty vocal. Actually, I've gotten engaged in a couple things where, sort of dipping the toe in the water in terms of creating community and programs, actually, for startup execs that are struggling. But it's an, especially, as I know and especially hard driving group that is resistant to acknowledging. I mean, everybody's killing it all the time, everything's great, we're crushing it. Like, that's not the mindset that leads to introspection about possible problems. So
I mean,
so I did have,
at the company I work at, um, I came in and one of the first things that I said to a couple of the leaders was, is there a sobriety group here? And they're like,
yeah,
no. And the company's been
yeah,
around for like, 12, 13
for a
years.
minute. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so anyways, I launched one and it's been launched to like, 4 or 5 thousand employees. And,
I
you know, it's,
love that.
it's been well received. So, I mean,
I love that.
it's something that I think every company needs to do. I think it's something that is not talked about enough. But
Yeah,
it certainly is a big conversation that I think a lot of companies need to start having if they aren't having it
yeah,
already.
yeah. It's funny. So and you may remember this from way back when, but I've been going to the TED conference for many
Sure.
years.
Sure.
And the main conference, it's pretty wild. It's very humbling to be there because you sort of turn the corner and, oh, there's Harrison Ford, and there's there's Bill Gates, like whatever, like
Yeah.
some pretty amazing people, and
There's
then
John
well, there's all these schleps like me as well, right? Who are kind of cruising around. So. but just it's a real it's an amazing environment. I think maybe 10 years ago or so, uh, I actually talked to the conference organizers and said, "Hey, do you guys have a meeting? Like, have you done that yet?" And they were
Yes.
like, "No, we don't." I was like, "Can I start one?"
Oh, that's
There.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And so the first one that we did, and I actually haven't been to TED in a few years, so I don't know whether it's still going. But the first one we did, the first meeting we had, like day one of the conference, there was like three of us, and then the next day there was like eight. And it's not a huge number, but what was insane was here we are sitting around this table. Part of me is thinking like there can't be any other alcoholics and addicts at this thing. These people are so talented. They're so like they're operating at tiers that are kind of unfathomable to me. Like
Mhm.
I'm just going to be sitting in that room by myself, like reading a book or something. And no, the people who come in, they are those incredibly talented, incredibly accomplished people, and they're sitting around the table. One of them had like 4 months sober and was really struggling, and was this person, whatever, this person who'd accomplished a ton, and there they were talking just the way I talked in early sobriety about this darkness inside, that this big hole that I couldn't fill with anything other than drugs and
Mhm.
alcohol. And it was a really, really powerful experience to just sort of see. So I've done that, and I've also gone to meetings in jails and psych wards. And you know what? It's all the same. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually a pretty cool notch on your resume to say I actually helped start an AA meeting at the actual TED conference. That's
Yeah, it's
pretty,
pretty cool.
yeah,
It's
that's
pretty
pretty
cool.
legit.
Yeah, it was really special. It was really special.
Well, I mean, I started this podcast for the very same reason. I felt like I feel like there's a lot of podcasts out there that kind of talk about like getting sober and whatever. I didn't feel like there were a lot of podcasts that actually kind of combine business and entrepreneurship and mental health and all the kind of
Yeah,
things that we did. And so, that's kind of why I did what I did. And again, it's kind of become, kind of something of its own,
I
which is
love it.
great. Um,
Yeah, it's amazing.
okay. About 6 months before you kind of hit
Mm,
your wall, somebody kind of said to you like, "Hey, I'm having some, I'm concerned,"
yeah,
and at what point was there kind of like this? Okay, we gotta, something's got to change.
yeah. So something like 3 months before, that same person, we were at a conference in Boston, I want to say, and that same person and I were at the conference together, that business partner, and we went out to a dinner, and I think at that point we'd talked a little bit about drinking, and there'd been this kind of like, "Hey, you know, there's a lot of drinking going on. Are you okay?" And it's funny, I didn't realize this in retrospect, but we're sitting at the dinner. It's a really nice dinner, and I order a Manhattan, and the you know as the story was told afterwards, so that ended up being a blur of a night, right? And
Sure.
uh, the next day I was talking to my business partner, and he was like, "Look, I'm really concerned. Like, I this doesn't seem right." And he said, "As soon as I saw you order that Manhattan, I knew it was going to be bad." And he said, "You came back at around midnight or one. You'd sort of gone off to do whatever. And I was sitting in the lobby of the hotel talking to a mutual friend of ours, and you walked right by us and didn't even see us, and you didn't look good." And that was humbling. And so we ended up.
You
I can't.
probably had no idea where you were. You were probably at like full blackout stage or close to
Yeah,
it.
and actually I didn't black out too much, but I certainly wasn't paying attention.
Sure.
And he's telling me this because we had decided we would go to his dad's or his parents' house and stay there for a night before flying back. Um, and he's telling me this in the car, and you know, that was the first time somebody ever said to me. He said, I think you should stop drinking, and I said, well, okay, well, like for how long? And he said, I mean, like forever. And that was the first time that somebody had said that to me, right? And that was jarring. That was really, really jarring. And so, we ended up at his dad's house, or parents' house, I can't remember. And I sort of spent a night on the couch, thinking this isn't great. I raided the liquor cabinet there because I was
Mm.
not feeling good. We flew out the next morning, and I was like, this is fine. I'm okay. And I was not okay. I got, shaky and sweaty on that flight. And it sort of started to creep into my subconscious that maybe something wasn't right. Now I'd had the benzos on top of all this. In the end, that's the thing. I was going on this slope, and the benzos on top of it turned into this, right? And you know what? Thank God that's what happened, because I could have probably gone another 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years, like on that slow descent into hell. Um, but
That's a
yeah,
really
that was
that's a really
yeah,
scary place to be. I
yeah,
mean, because I've been there. I've been there
yep,
on numerous occasions, whether it's coming off alcohol, whether it's coming off of Coke, whether it's coming off of Vicodin,
yep,
the shakes, the sweats, the restless leg,
yep,
the palpitations. Like those are scary things to do. And I think when you're in that moment, you're like, wow, why? This is not normal. Like, why is this
yeah.
happening to me? Like, this won't happen to anybody else, but in fact, it is.
It is, and it does. Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. So then, that led into the sort of the final descent, right? That last 90 days. And, I was increasingly absent from the business. It was pretty clear that nobody was writing checks for anything on the VC front. Like we were actually this close to a deal with a very large well-established venture firm. It was like the
I
only
remember
check
that.
they were gonna write that quarter. And they just couldn't get the internal green light on it. Now, how much did my drinking impact that? I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. I don't know how much. I can't say one way or the other if I'd been sober, whether we would have sort of pulled that miracle across the line. It was an environment where all the funding had dried up. The reality is that what that meant, whether I could have pulled that deal in or not, what it meant is that I was in no place, in no position to help the company navigate that crisis. Like let's say there was no way anybody was raising any money. Well, we still needed to figure out what the heck to do next and how to pull it
Yeah, you
off.
still got to pay the bills. Still got to keep
Still
the
got to
lights
pay the
on.
bills.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to make the hard choices. You got to, find a buyer if you can do that. And I was absolutely incapable of that because of my disease and how it had progressed. And realistically, one of my business partners had to step in and try to pull the whole thing together on his own. And that's one of the biggest, you know, um, kind of heartbreaking things that I think about is what I put him through. And by the way, we've reconnected after all these years, and we're incredibly close again, and it's the most beautiful
Oh,
thing.
that's great. That's great. I was
Yeah.
going to ask you if you've actually performed a ninth step on him, and that's
Oh,
terrific.
absolutely. I mean,
That's
that
great.
was that was part of the deal, and
You
and
know,
the
I,
night.
you know,
Go
I,
ahead.
I remember, I remember where I was and being in the room when I heard the news from your partner
Yeah.
when he brought everybody together and just kind of said, here's the deal, here's the situation. Didn't get
Yeah.
into any particular detail. I mean, we all had a hunch in terms of kind of
What was going on?
the why,
Yeah.
but we didn't understand the what.
Yeah.
Um, now, I've talked with others on previous episodes about kind of the moment that there was this, like their bottom, whether it was an intervention or what have you.
Yeah.
Was this something that was just the two of you? Was it something that like the board basically sat you down and said, or was it like, what was
No.
that like?
Yeah. So there was one board member who sort of took me aside and said, what's going on? And of course, I think it actually was like a little bit loaded during that conversation, at 10 in the
Mm.
morning, of course. And I think I managed to convince him, or in my head I did, that I was okay. So they didn't take an action right away. So the very end of the end was so the last 30 days where I the I was mostly absent from the office with the excuse that I was out there trying to put money together and do these
Sure.
things. And, of course I wasn't. I think I had an assistant at the time, like pretty much every morning I would check in and say, hey, I've got a whole bunch of other things that have come up to try to raise money. Can you clear my calendar again? Right. So I was just, totally absent. And, not surprising, those days were not filled with productive, useful activities. And so right about that time, my now former spouse,
Hmm.
basically was like, hey, look, this isn't working. You gotta make some changes. And it was actually, I even remember, I think, oh, that was a different, maybe that was a different one. I don't know. This was that same era. I remember at one point drinking vodka out of a water glass so that it looked like water,
Sweet.
Uh, like really good thinking. Like, this is genius level,
I did that.
obfuscation. Yeah.
Then I
And I was at
realized
the bottom.
that why do I need a glass? I can just drink from the bottle. So that was much
Yeah,
easier.
exactly. Well,
Hmm.
so I'm in the house, and this maybe was on a weekend. I'm at the bottom of the stairs with my glass of vodka, and my then wife is at the top of. She comes around. She's at the top of the stairs, and she goes, "That isn't water, is it?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is." And I'm like sitting there, like I've got like 25 feet between me and the truth, and I couldn't pull it off. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Um, yeah.
I've
And
heard
so,
that,
so,
I've
so
heard that story a million
a billion
times.
times, I know. And of
Hmm.
course, in the moment, I think I'm the only one in the world who's ever done this kind of thing. You know what I mean? That's the isolation aspect. Like, when you're surrounded by people who don't drink that way, it feels like you're insane, and that there's nobody else in the world who could possibly have done this. And then when you surround yourself with people in recovery, you hear like, oh yeah, I did that every day. Like that's
Oh
so
yeah.
pedestrian,
Yeah. It's like no shock. Shock here.
yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
so that was about the point where she said, "Hey, look, I'm taking the kids back to my hometown for 3 weeks to visit family. You either clean yourself up in that period, or you're out, right?" Um, and
You're like,
so
sweet. I have 3 weeks of freedom.
I have 3 weeks of freedom. Now, the first thought I had was, okay, like I've sobered up in 3 weeks before, and and stayed sober because I did that. I had little runs of like, I'm gonna take a month off, I'm gonna take, whatever. This is where they say, like, when you stop drinking, your disease is out in the parking lot doing push-ups. Like, it gets
Oh yeah.
stronger, even without drinking, right?
Yep.
So I'm like, yeah, this is like, I can do this. Okay, this is fine. Let's do this. Let's I have some conviction about cleaning up. And then they leave, and I think to myself, I could probably get sober in 2 weeks. And so I go, keep going for a week, and then it's 2 weeks left till they get back. I'm like, oh, I could
Two
probably
weeks.
get sober in a week, right? So go for another week, and I'm at a week till they get back. I'm like, I only need a couple days to get sober. And like, this is obviously really obvious where this story ends.
Uh-huh.
She calls me from the airport to come pick them up, and I am surrounded by empty bottles and in no place to drive anyone anywhere. Um and I just said the first honest thing, which is like, I can't stop. And so they took a cab back, and I called a cab and went to the hospital. And it was one of the hospitals there up on the hill in San Francisco. And I go to the triage nurse, and again, said one of the first honest things in my drinking to this
Oh,
amazing, like, angel of a woman. I said, she said, "What's going on?" The triage nurse. And I said, "I can't stop drinking, and I don't know why." And she looked at me with love, and she said, "We're going to take care of you.
wow, that's
It's
powerful.
okay." Yeah, it was amazing. And
I have chills, man.
so
Like
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's crazy. So
It,
that
it, it was
so
amazing.
so would you call the call from from the airport, where you're like, I can't stop, or would you call that moment with that nurse kind of your aha moment, your surrender moment, as they say?
So
or
real
was
close
it
to that,
more?
real close to that. It was the way I kind of think about it is that kicked off like a 10-minute sort of, you know, mini moment of clarity where I
Mm,
hung up the phone and I had 10 minutes where I was like, now what? What do I do? And the real moment of clarity was I um I looked up the hospital and where it was. And
mm,
I was like, I guess this is what I'm gonna do. And then I called a cab. And that was it. That was the I don't know what's going on, and I'm just gonna go to the hospital. Like I'm just gonna give up and go to the hospital. Um, and this is the way our stories go, which is like so many things had to line up exactly the way they lined up to get to that point where I'm standing in front of a triage nurse who's an angel who tells me she's going to help me, and I believed her. And by the way, just as a little coda on that story, several years later, so as often happens, the place where you do the end of your drinking drug use can be a little haunted, right? Like it's the city has the feel, and San Francisco was that way for me for a little bit. And I ended up from that moment going into the hospital, spending a couple nights in a detox kind of a
sure.
setting, which gave my parents enough time to figure out like, wow, this is a problem, and get a rehab set up. And so I flew to Portland,
Yep.
which is my hometown, with my mom, and started treatment there, or in Hazel and Betty Ford. It was, I guess, uh, it was Hazelden at the time in Newberg, Oregon. But again,
That's
the
the
coda on
Hazleton.
this.
It's basically in between multiple vineyards, which is ironic.
Yeah, it really is. In fact, the same guy who sort of started that, seeded that location,
Yeah.
owns a winery and
Yep. The
so
family
he's
does.
picking it up on both ends. You know what I mean? Supply and demand. It's pretty amazing. So
Yeah, I
that
know the Hazeltine guys, and I know the Serenity Lane guys. In
yeah.
fact, Pete Kearns, the CEO of Serenity Lane, was on previous
Oh, that's
episode.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
a really amazing ecosystem up there,
yeah, oh yeah,
and but the coda that I do want to share that was really special and kind of like reclaiming San Francisco for me. So, I did a 9-step tour in San Francisco,
mm,
and there were two moments that were incredibly powerful. One of them was sitting down to do a 9-step with somebody who'd been affiliated with the company, as an older guy. Um, he was kind of like advisor, sort of like connection to the business, cheerleader, whatever. And I sat down with him for breakfast. I asked if I could, and I started saying, doing my 9th step, which for those
sure,
of you who haven't done it, scary,
very,
absolutely freeing, beautiful. It's not about apologies; it's about making it right. And so I had my little speech, and I said my thing, and he's sitting there, and as he's sitting there, I'm talking. He starts smiling, and he gets a bigger and bigger grin on his face, and he gets a little teary, and he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a 27-year chip, and
no
he sets it
way.
on the yeah. And I
Uh,
had no idea. I had
that's
no idea. And we just sit there, we're both crying, and that was crazy. And so then the other moment was I had decided to go back to that hospital. And I went back to that hospital. I went up to the triage. It wasn't the same nurse.
oh wow.
And I said, hey, I just want you to know something. Um, at this point, it was maybe a year and a half earlier or something. I said, like a year to year and a half ago, I came up here and I was completely broken and I was completely addicted to alcohol. And somebody sitting in your seat gave me hope. And
Mm,
I just want you to know that there, people in my situation, I was drunk, I was a mess. You see them all the time coming in here to the ER. We do recover, and I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. So I got to do that little thing, and oh my God, what a moment that was. You know what I mean? To kind of revisit the end of it all, and tell somebody else, even though it wasn't the same person, just how important her work was, and the work of her colleague, and somebody's sobriety journey.
there's something to be said about a freedom that comes from being on the other side and being able to admit. kind of what's going on and everything else, and then being able to kind of have closure around that, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, we're gonna. I think at this point, I just have one more question for you, and
Sure.
then we'll go ahead and wrap up. So, you know, I'm sure over time, over the last 16 years of your sobriety journey, um, you've helped others in a lot of
Mm.
different levels. I know that. Have leaders reached out to you and said, "Hey, I think I have a problem. What do I do?" How have you handled that? How have you managed that? How have you used, because that's our superpower, is actually helping
That's right.
others.
Yeah.
So what have you done with your superpower to help others, especially around business and entrepreneurship and things like that?
Yeah. Um, so, I started being pretty open about being sober maybe 3 or 4 years in. I was a little protective of my anonymity, and it felt a little scary. And then I just sort of decided to wear it, a little more openly, and what I found was just incredible. So, even in a social situation, I would be offered a drink, and I'd say, no, I don't drink. I've been sober for a few years, and um, what I found is that there's really only three responses that I get to that. And by the way, this is often in circles where there's a lot of leaders and it's a cocktail
Sure.
party and whatever. But the only three responses I get, one of them is somebody kind of backs away slowly because they're scared of it, and they're holding like, two shots and they're already kind of plastered, right? Like, and it's a threat to them, right? Which is okay. Like, that's okay. It's not intended to be that way, but it's like, wow, here's a sober person. This is scary. The other one that I get is, that's so amazing. That's so amazing. Congratulations. My dad got sober and it changed my life. And then the third one I get is somebody leans in and gets this sort of different look, and they say, "Can you answer a couple questions and help me?"
Uh-huh. Yep.
Right, right. So,
Yep.
and that may be helping them specifically with their drinking. It might be
Or
helping,
another.
another, right? So
Yep.
I basically found that, just by doing that, by being open about my sobriety, the opportunities to help others, and you said it, and this is the whole point of this podcast, is all we have to help is our stories. Like, I'm never going to talk to that person and say, "Here's what you should do." Like, you need to do this, you need to do this, here's your plan, whatever. I sit them down and I tell the same story I just told you. This is
Yep.
what it was like. This is what happened. This is what it's like now.
That's
And
right.
and that's the superpower that we all have, honestly, is our story. And there's some language in some of our literature about that. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll find our experience can help others, or something like that. Like, if I hadn't
It's
driven
in the
with my
promises.
kids, in the promises, if I hadn't driven with my kids under the influence, I wouldn't have that story to tell to somebody else that is doing that right now, that now can look at me and go, "Oh my God, I'm not alone. Somebody else has done this, and look at them, they're okay. How is this possible?" That lean in moment, right? So no matter how far down the scale, no matter what it is that we've done, no matter how dark it got, in fact, in some ways, the darker the better. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
we can help that person who's really, 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 in the well.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for telling your story. Obviously, I love you like a brother. We've known each other for a very, very long time, and it's ironic that a few years back in 2021, when I first got sober,
Hmm.
I was it was in the midst of COVID, and I think I just randomly clicked on a meeting,
Hmm.
and you were in there, and I kind of looked, and your
Yeah.
beard was little shorter than it was now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
look, I was like, holy fucking shit, that's John. I was like, so I texted you, and you're like, holy
Yeah.
shit, that's you, and then like we just reconnected.
Yeah.
Just the beauty of this program. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, who you know. Like, it just, the connections in terms of how you stay together and everything else is it's a beautiful thing, and it's a pay it
Yeah.
forward type of thing. So thank you for
Eh,
being here, and thank you for telling your
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. It's been a real pleasure. And that's such a great way to end it. That captures the magic of this whole thing, right? Like, these two guys who knew each other way back when, like, stumble into each other in the middle of a pandemic in a Zoom meeting, and we're both on this same path doing the same thing. getting better, helping other people. Like that was an absolute utter magic moment. And that's what happens when you get sober.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for being here. And John, I love you, brother.
Love you too.
It's just to let everybody know, this is a resource. As I said at the beginning, this is not a place to go if you want to get sober. This is certainly, there's some great content here that you're going to hopefully glean from and take something. Maybe you heard something that you can go and talk to somebody about. Maybe you know somebody that you're concerned about. Maybe you think you have a problem, but the best way to first go through the process is actually say, I think I have a problem. And then
Hmm.
there's certainly kind of the outlets to do that, whether it's going to AA or going to rehab, but it starts with asking for help, just like you did, John. And
All right.
so everybody, thank you so much for being here. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. And John, thanks again, man. Just an incredible story. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.
Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without knowing.